welcome to Sound Advice, the hearing-friendly business podcast, and welcome listeners. Today we have a special guest, Neil Bauman, Ph.D. He likes to be called Dr. Neil, and he is a hearing loss coping skills specialist. He's also a researcher. He's an author of multiple books in a couple of different areas, but he has a lot of books on hearing loss, which is our focus today. And he's also a speaker on issues pertaining to hearing loss. Dr. Neil is no stranger to the problems associated with hearing loss. He has successfully lived with a lifelong severe heredity hearing loss himself. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Neil, what kind of hearing loss do you have?
Well, I have the rarest kind of hearing loss you could have if you wanted to have one. It's what's called a reverse slope hearing loss, which means I do not hear low frequency sounds, but I can hear very high frequency sounds. In fact, sounds that are so high that most people can't hear them, and yet I hear them about 1,000 times better than a person with perfect hearing. And yet standing face to face, 4 feet away, I can't hear them talking. So that's the rarest kind of hearing loss.
So it's kind of like sonic in a way, or what dogs have where they can hear that high pitched sound, right?
Yeah, when I was younger, because now that I'm an old goat, I've lost a lot of my high frequency hearing because of what they call presbycusis, which is just hearing loss with aging, which starts in the high frequency and takes them out. So in the last 10 years, I've lost an enormous amount of the hearing that I ever had. But when I was younger, I got myself a silent dog whistle, and I was standing in the house and the dog was sleeping on the ground outside. So I blew it, through the window, and right away his ears perked up. Boy, that hurt me. Oh, wow. It's so shrill that it just gives you an instant headache.
Ooh, that doesn't sound like fun.
No, so you can have high frequency hearing, but it's not fun.
But you were able to hear women, because women's voices are almost always in the high pitch range, right?
Well, they're a little higher than men's, and an octave higher, but I'm talking like up at 15 or 20,000 hertz.
Wow.
Way up there. And I could hear, even today, after I've lost so much of my hearing, I can still hear up to about 15,000 hertz.
That's impressive. So can you give us a real life example of what 15 hertz would be? 15, and I know that's a new question, but there we go.
15,000 hertz would just be a very high-pitched, thin whistle type of sound.
So whistle.
If you can remember back when you were young and charming, not that you're not still charming, but remember the old TVs, and you could hear the flyback transformer. It made a whine, and you could hear that. People, once they get over 25 or so, no longer hear that. And okay, well, I could hear those kind of very high pitched sounds. In fact, I could walk down the sidewalk and I could tell every house as we went by it, I could tell whether their TV was on because I could hear that high pitched whine outside on the sidewalk, and yet I couldn't hear them. And yet when I would go into the house, if I visited somebody, I would have to put my ear something like this close to the speaker before I could even tell they had the sound on.
Wow. So closer than 4 feet. So more like 12 inches, so that's what it looked like.
Well,
so do you wear cochlear implants or hearing aids now?
I have hearing aids. I wear hearing aids occasionally. I'm supposed to wear them all the time, but because of my kind of hearing loss, and hearing aids just can't be fit to cover what I need. Like yesterday, I was doing the dishes and I had my hearing aids on because there's somebody going to be coming to the door. And just the dishes in the sink and cutlery just touching them, it was so loud, it was hurting. So I had to take my hearing aids off just so I can do it. So
yeah. So I know before you've told me a joke that some people have heard and some people haven't heard, but there is a story around a woman cooking dinner at the kitchen, in the kitchen. So we're on kitchen topic now. And then her husband came up behind her. What was that story again?
Well, that's a cool one. That was to show how people hearing loss sneaks up on people without them really being aware of it. Some people, of course, they lose a hearing overnight, but other people it's just gradual. And so it was a story about Harry and Betty. Now, Harry knew that his wife was losing her hearing. And Betty, she was very adamant it was not her. She could hear fine. And Harry knew he was wrong because she just didn't hear him. So he went to the doctor and he said, "Doc, what can I do to prove to my wife that she's losing her hearing and needs to get it attended to?" And the doctor said, "Well, stand some distance behind her and ask her a question. If she answers it, you know she's hearing. And if she doesn't, move closer until she does answer. And you'll know how bad her hearing is." So Harry came home and his wife was standing at the sink getting the supper ready. So he stood back in the living room and he called out, "Honey, what's for supper?" And as he knew, there was no answer. So he went and stood in the dining room and called again, "Honey, what's for supper?" Still no answer. So he moved closer and stood in the kitchen doorway. And for the third time, he said, "Honey, what's for supper?" And when there was no answer, he was shocked. I mean, he knew his wife's hearing was bad. He just didn't realize it was that bad. So then he went and stood right behind her, came up and stood right behind her and said, "Honey, what's for supper?" And turning around, she said, "Spaghetti and meatballs," I said, for the fourth time.
So that same principle could also be applied if you have a newborn or a little toddler or anybody else. You simply can go behind them and simply say something and see whether they respond or not. Because I do know a little girl who is now an extremely successful adult, but when she was younger, somehow or another they missed Dr. Marion Down's newborn screening test. And the obstetrician is the one that paid the price for that one, who also went to the same school. Their kids went to the same school. So it's kind of a touchy situation. But apparently it took her, both of her parents were attorneys, and it took them until 2 years to decide on whether to do a cochlear implant or not. But because this child needed one, but at the same time, if they had done something so simple as walked behind the individual and said, "Whatever you want to say, honey, is dinner ready yet? Or would you like some candy in the case of a child, or would you like to go to the movies or TV or whatever?"
Or like my dad did. My parents didn't know I had the hearing loss. I'm sitting on the floor in the kitchen playing with my toys. And my dad, remember, he didn't know, but he just happened to be behind me. And he said he was going to go out in the car. And he said, "Do you want to go for a drive?" And I ignored him. And I mean, you don't ignore. I mean, this was a 29 Buick in those days. And I loved going in a car. And my dad knew that. And so when I didn't respond, then he said, "Do you want some ice cream?" Well, ice cream was a real treat for us. And so, yeah, I wanted it, but I didn't respond. I was just playing with my toys. And that's when they decided maybe I couldn't hear. But you see, the thing was, I was so good at lip reading that they had not noticed that. I was almost 4 at the time. And I still lip read today. I've been lip reading every day of my life. In fact, I tell people that my first language is speech reading.